do American states still enjoy a certain degree of freedom, which might be enough to counter the bad policies that are coming from DC.
The United States still has a decent amount of federalism, but not as much as we used to. If you go back earlier in the 20th century, uh, state and local governments were basically two-thirds of government, and the federal government, the central government, was only one-third of government. And what's happened is, and by the way, back then, we had a federal government, a central government. We call it the federal government, which doesn't make sense. The central government, back in the early 1900s, 1920s, was only about 2 to 3% of GDP. It was very small. It basically just focused on things like national defense. And the state and local governments, they were maybe 5 to 10% of GDP, depending on the year and what was happening. Well, what's happened is state and local governments haven't gotten smaller, but the central government has gotten much, much bigger. And so now two-thirds of government, more than two-thirds of government, is now at this central government level. So we still have some federalism. For instance, states are the ones deciding whether there are lockdowns, not the central government. States are deciding that. States still have choices of what kind of tax system to have. So you have some states like California, where the top tax rate is more than 13%. And then you have fast growing, much more prosperous states like Texas and Florida with no income tax. So there is still federalism in the United States, but it's been shrinking over time. And that's very, very unfortunate because you get better results when, well, first of all, when government's smaller, but then you get better results when those decisions are made closer to the actual people who are affected. So I'm jealous of Switzerland. Switzerland still has genuine federalism in a really significant way. To me, if I was in Europe, if I was in France or Germany or Italy, and I was looking across the border at Switzerland, government is much, much smaller. Taxpayers are treated much, much better. And yet, are you suffering from bad roads? No. Are you suffering from bad healthcare? No. Are you suffering from bad education? No. In other words, everything that just sort of an ordinary person thinks of as a function of government, Switzerland does it much better for much less money. And I think one of the reasons is because they have a decentralized system. I want the United States to go back in that direction by getting a lot of these functions of government out of Washington, some of them back to the private sector, but to the extent that they are government responsibilities, it's much better to handle most of them at the state and local level.